What's up, guys? Hey, um, hope you guys are doing well. Welcome back to our next installment of YOCF in the Wild. Want to encourage you guys, if you haven't been doing these, it's not too late for you to jump in. If this is your first time joining us for YOCF in the Wild, or if you've been here every single week, we're glad you guys are here. Hopefully this is a way for you guys to continue to be connected to one another and connected to God's Word during this time. So hopefully, and remember, the entire hope behind YOCF in the Wild is that you'd be doing this in community. You'd be doing this with your friends or your family. Maybe grab your youth group leader and do this together with them. But hopefully you guys are doing this with people. So we are jumping into the next character study in YOCF in the Wild, and we have been going through different characters who appear in this passage that we see in Hebrews 11. And this passage in Hebrews 11, it has a nickname, and it's called the Hall of Faith. It's some of the most famous and some of the most faithful people of the Old Testament that get mentioned in this passage. And we've been looking at them one at a time, 1 week at a time. And this week is no different. So we are looking at, this one is a little bit different. We're not looking at an individual, we're looking at a group of people. So I'm going to read this verse out of Hebrews 11 that will introduce our character. And our character, again, is really a group of people. And then we'll take a look. In our passage, the verse says this, Hebrews 11, verse 29. It says, "It was by faith that the people of Israel went through the Red Sea as though they were on dry ground. But when the Egyptians tried to follow, they were all drowned." So today we are looking at not a character, but we're looking at the people of Israel who walked through the Red Sea. So as you are in community doing this together, I'm going to ask that you would pause the video right here and answer this question. What do you know about the people of Israel? So much, really a large part of the Old Testament is talking about the faithfulness and the unfaithfulness of God's chosen people, the people of Israel. So go ahead and pause this, spend as much time as you need. What do you know about the people of Israel? Cool? Welcome back. Now, we were in Hebrews 11, which is towards the back of the Bible. And so we're going to flip all the way back towards the beginning, actually the very second book of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus. We're going to be in the book of Exodus, chapter 14. And now we're looking at the story of the people of Israel who left Egypt through the Red Sea. So this is part of a really big story that we actually looked at a few weeks ago. And Moses is kind of one of the central figures of this story. And remember, he rescues the people out of Israel, or out of Egypt. He approaches the Pharaoh, tells him to let my people go. There's the plagues. And on their way out, the Pharaoh, who is such an interesting character, he says, all right, take your people. And then as they're leaving, he says, you know what? Changed my mind. I want them back, or I want them dead. So he sends his army after them. And in this really climactic moment of the Exodus and the escape of the Israelites, we find the Israelites and the people of Israel standing at the shores of the Red Sea in front of them, and the army of Egypt behind them. So this is a really intense moment, and I'm sure they felt very, very trapped and very scared, and they were probably rushed, and there's men, and there's women, and there's children, and there's death behind them, and a sea in front of them. So before we jump into this passage, I'm going to ask you guys again to talk about this with your group. Have you ever felt this way? Likely not as intense as they were feeling it, because it was literally a life or death situation. Maybe you have, you could talk about it. But have you ever felt like there was no good direction for you to turn? That if you kept going in life the way that it was going, that wasn't going to turn out well. And if you turned around and tried to return to what you were doing before, that wasn't going to work out well either. What was that like? What was that situation? And how did you feel about those things? So go ahead, again, pause this video and talk about those things. Great. let's see what the passage says here. Thanks for talking about those things. Exodus 14, we're going to pick up and read a couple verses here and there, starting with verse 21. Remember, this is the people of Israel on their way out of Egypt, the shores of the Red Sea in front of them, and the armies of Egypt behind them, closing in. And this is what it says. Verse 21, then Moses raised his hand over the sea, and the Lord opened up a path through the waters with a strong east wind. The wind blew all night, turning the seabed into dry land. So the people of Israel walked through the middle of the sea on dry ground with walls of water on each side. Could you imagine that? I imagine, I don't know if you've ever been to like an aquarium, but sometimes aquariums have this like arch dome where you can walk through this tunnel and it's like a glass dome, and on the outside of the dome it's like an aquarium. It's fish and it's water and it's clear and you can see big fish and little fish, and if you go to, I think like the aquarium in the Pacific and some of the big aquariums you can go to, like have sharks swimming around. You're literally walking through this water. I imagine it felt something like that, but like way more terrifying because I don't know, this is unprecedented and the waters are, I don't know, forming walls, and it's crazy. And for me, every time I read this passage, it always looked differently in my mind. I think I watched The Prince of Egypt. Maybe you've seen that Disney movie too many times, and in that movie, it seems like the armies of Egypt are like right behind them. Like they're sprinting through the Red Sea because you can see the armies behind them. But in this passage, it says that the seas opened up for the entire night and they were able to walk through. And so what that tells me is that, okay, maybe the armies weren't as close as I imagined them to be, but they were closing in, that they were coming and they knew that they were coming. But they had at least the entire night to walk on this dry path between the waters. And so, again, I'm going to ask you to pause the video two more times here through this talk. And the next time I want you to talk about this question. Did you know that they had all night to walk through it? Or did you think that they were like sprinting through the waters because the army was right behind them? And the reason I ask that is because I think there are so many things about the Bible, and especially these Bible stories, and especially if you grew up in the church, that we hear these stories and they're different in our minds, or they're different than the way that we were taught than they actually happened in the Bible. So is that the case for you, or did you know this, did you not? Go ahead and discuss these things. Let me go ahead and fix this. Great, okay, phone's freaking out here. All right, go ahead. All right, welcome back. I'm going to read a couple more verses here and finish off the story here. So they've walked through the water, and verse 26 says this. When all the Israelites had reached the other side, the Lord said to Moses, raise your hand over the sea again. Then the waters will rush back and cover the Egyptians and their chariots and charioteers. Skipping to verse 29. But the people of Israel had walked through the middle of the sea on dry ground as the waters stood up like a wall on both sides. Verse 31, when the people of Israel saw the mighty power that the Lord has unleashed on the Egyptians, they were filled with awe before him. They put their faith in the Lord and in his servant Moses. This story is honestly like so crazy. There are so many stories in the Bible that I need to like conscientiously remind myself that this isn't a fairy tale, that this is historical, that these things really happened, that the Lord literally split waters and let his people walk through it. And not only that, but he closed the waters while there was an entire army in between the walls of the water. So to think that the entire army were washed away is a really sobering thing to think about. What I want to draw your attention to here is how the people of Israel responded in this moment. And remember, thinking back to the beginning, Hebrews 11 includes the people of Israel in the Hall of Fame of Faith, saying that they were some of the most faithful people. And if you look at the last verse in chapter 14. I'll read it again. It says this: "When the people of Israel saw the mighty power that the Lord had unleashed against the Egyptians, they were filled with awe before him. They put their faith in the Lord and in their servant Moses." And I think that moment right there is really what solidified their place in the Hall of Faith. That yes, that they were faithful to walk through the path that God had put for them, but also when they had witnessed the miracles of the Lord, their reaction was being filled with awe and filled with faith. And I think that is such an important thing to understand, and for us to know too. We witness miracles of the Lord all the time. Maybe not as dramatic and obvious as, an ocean and a sea being split in two, but I'm sure that you can think back on your life and think, man, that moment or that season or that thing that happened could only have happened from the Lord. Maybe it was a health scare and somebody was healed. Maybe it was you or somebody else or somebody in your family. And those are miracles of the Lord. And what we need to respond with is awe and faith. And sometimes I think we forget the miracles that we've experienced. And we forget the ways that God has worked in our lives. So the last question for you guys to discuss here today is, what are some of the miracles and what are some of the ways that you've seen God working in your life or in the lives around you? Have you seen God do incredible things or witnessed God do incredible things for you or for other people? And let's share those things with each other and recognize and remember the ways that God has worked. And then I want you to finish in a time of prayer, again, reminding yourselves that our response to the miracles of the Lord should be putting our faith in Him. So guys, thanks for tuning in and thanks for listening. I'm praying for you guys. Hopefully we'll be back together soon enough. But let's continue to make the most of this season together by continuing to stay connected virtually and digitally and staying connected to God's Word. Love you guys.